know that Mike really started picking bikes. Bicycles were his life when he was a little kid. He just wanted bicycles, so he would search for them and fix them and resell them at school.
On the morning of June 17th, 2025, numerous major news outlets simultaneously reported that Danielle Colby, the prominent office manager and buyer from the reality television show American Pickers, had been implicated in a massive investigation. The charges sounded like something from a crime thriller: organized trafficking of historically significant textiles, operating an underground restoration network, and manipulating the vintage clothing and burlesque memorabilia market worth millions of dollars. To millions of viewers, Danielle Colby had always embodied the image of a knowledgeable, tattooed collector with an eye for vintage clothing and burlesque history. Her distinctive style and expertise made her a beloved figure on the show. But the truth revealed during a 38-day investigation painted a different portrait. A methodical operator with connections to underground networks specializing in historically significant textiles from around the world. The story began on February 23, 2025, when customs officials at O'Hare International Airport intercepted a package addressed to a small art gallery in Chicago. The shipment, originating from Mexico City, contained what appeared to be vintage fabric samples. However, an alert customs agent recognized distinctive patterns consistent with ceremonial textiles that had been reported stolen from a museum in Oaxaca the previous year. When authorities tracked the package's intended destination, they discovered it was a small gallery registered to a company called Vintage Visions LLC, a shell company that investigation would later reveal had connections to Colby through several intermediaries. This discovery triggered a deeper investigation codenamed Operation Threadbare. The first real breakthrough came when investigators obtained a search warrant for a warehouse located in an industrial district of Chicago. According to records, the property had been leased by another company with indirect ties to Colby. What they found inside would completely change the direction of the investigation. The warehouse contained an elaborate textile restoration facility. Climate-controlled rooms housed hundreds of delicate vintage garments, burlesque costumes, and historical textiles from various eras and regions. Advanced conservation equipment, specialized cleaning stations, and a digital scanning system indicated a sophisticated operation far beyond what might be expected from a simple collector. While the facility itself wasn't illegal, inventory records revealed numerous items that matched descriptions of textiles reported missing from museums and private collections worldwide. Particularly concerning was a room dedicated to what appeared to be Native American ceremonial garments, some dating back to the 19th century, with no clear documentation of their provenance. Former employees of the warehouse, speaking anonymously to investigators, described a complex operation where items would arrive from various sources, undergo professional restoration, and then be photographed extensively before being shipped to private collectors. One former worker stated, "We were told never to ask where the items came from, just to focus on restoration. Some pieces arrived in the middle of the night, were processed immediately, and were gone within days." Digital records seized from computers at the warehouse revealed communications with collectors across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. These exchanges included coded language about special acquisitions and privately sourced heritage pieces, with price tags reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The investigation expanded when authorities obtained warrants to search Colby's primary residence and a secondary property in Puerto Rico. At her main home, investigators discovered a hidden room behind a sliding bookcase that contained a vast archive of documentation, photographs of textiles from museums worldwide, detailed notes on security systems of various institutions, and contact information for individuals later identified as known operators in the black market for cultural artifacts. But it was the Puerto Rico property that yielded the most shocking discovery. Inside what appeared to be a normal beachfront home, investigators found an underground level accessed through a concealed entrance in the floor of a walk-in closet. This subterranean space housed what authorities described as a museum-quality collection of historically significant garments, including items identified as missing from collections in Peru, Guatemala, Mexico, and various Native American tribal collections. FBI agents working with cultural heritage experts were reportedly stunned by the scale and quality of the hidden collection. One agent later described the moment they entered the underground facility. "We expected to find maybe a few questionable items. Instead, We walked into what amounted to a private museum containing pieces that rightfully belonged in national collections. Some of these items were thought to be lost forever. The financial investigation revealed a sophisticated network of transactions. Analysis of banking records showed that since 2015, Colby had established at least 7 separate LLCs across multiple states, with money moving between them in patterns consistent with laundering operations. Cryptocurrency wallets linked to her contained transactions worth over $3.2 million, with significant transfers to entities and countries known for weak enforcement of cultural property laws. What complicated the case further was evidence suggesting that Colby may have been operating with at least partial knowledge of several other prominent figures in the antiques and vintage collection world. Text messages recovered from a secured phone revealed communications with individuals identified only by code names, including references to someone called the Picker, who appeared to have provided access to certain locations or collections. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they determined that the operation had likely begun as a legitimate interest in vintage clothing and burlesque history, areas where Colby had established genuine expertise. However, as her connections expanded and the financial potential became clear, the operation had gradually crossed into legally questionable territory. Former associates interviewed during the investigation described how Colby's approach had changed over time. At first, she was all about preservation and education, said one source who had worked with her on early burlesque history projects. She wanted to save these pieces of performance history that were being lost. But then something shifted. She became obsessed with acquiring items that weren't accessible to the public, things that belonged in private hands, as she would say. The case took another turn when investigators discovered connections to several suspicious museum thefts that had occurred in regions where American Pickers had filmed episodes. While no direct evidence linked the show's production to these incidents, the timing and geographical correlations raised serious questions about whether scouting for the show might have served a secondary purpose. When federal agents finally moved to detain Colby for questioning, she was in the middle of filming a segment for the show. Witnesses described the shocking moment when agents approached the set and escorted her away as cameras continued to roll. Production was immediately shut down, with the History Channel quickly issuing a statement that they were shocked by the allegations and fully cooperating with authorities. During initial questioning, Colby maintained that she was merely an avid collector with a passion for preservation. "I've dedicated my life to saving historical textiles that would otherwise be destroyed or forgotten," she stated in her first interview with investigators. "Everything I've done has been out of respect for the cultural significance of these pieces." However, the evidence painted a different picture. Detailed ledgers found in her Puerto Rico property contained entries that clearly indicated knowledge of questionable provenance, with notes such as "no exhibition history, perfect," and "documentation removed as requested," next to descriptions of particularly valuable items. As the investigation expanded, it began to reveal the true scale of the operation. Authorities estimated that over 500 historically significant textiles and garments had passed through Colby's network, with a market value exceeding $15 million. More concerning to cultural historians was the fact that many of these items had significant cultural and historical importance beyond their monetary value, with some being irreplaceable artifacts of indigenous cultures. The prosecution built its case methodically, focusing not just on the trafficking aspects, but also on the sophisticated efforts to conceal the operation's true nature. Forensic accountants traced financial transactions through multiple jurisdictions, while cultural heritage experts worked to identify the origins of recovered items and establish their protected status. Colby's defense team attempted to portray her actions as those of a passionate preservationist who had occasionally operated in gray areas, but always with the ultimate goal of protecting historical items. They pointed to the pristine condition of the recovered items and the extensive documentation she had maintained about each piece as evidence of her care and respect for their cultural significance. Throughout the proceedings, public reaction remained divided. Many fans of American Pickers expressed disbelief, arguing that someone who had shown such apparent respect for history on television couldn't possibly be involved in illegal trafficking. Others pointed out that her expertise and connections made her perfectly positioned to operate such a network. The History Channel, facing intense scrutiny, conducted its own internal review of footage and production records. While they found no evidence that the show itself had been used directly for illegal activities, they discovered that Colby had occasionally requested unusual access to locations or extended time in certain areas, ostensibly for additional filming that never appeared in final episodes. After weeks of hearings and presentation of evidence, the case moved toward resolution. Faced with overwhelming documentation of her involvement, Colby agreed to a plea arrangement. In exchange for cooperation in identifying other participants in the network and assisting in the recovery of additional missing artifacts, she would receive a reduced sentence. As part of her statement to the court, Colby finally acknowledged the true nature of her activities. What began as a passion for preservation became something else entirely. I convinced myself that I was rescuing these pieces from neglect or destruction, that I was a guardian rather than a trafficker. I was wrong, and in the process, I disrespected the very cultures and histories I claimed to value. The terms of her plea deal required her to forfeit all illegally acquired items, pay substantial restitution, and assist in the repatriation of cultural artifacts to their rightful communities and institutions. The agreement also included a commitment to use her knowledge and platform, once legal proceedings concluded, to educate the public about the importance of ethical collecting and the damage caused by the illicit trade in cultural property. In the aftermath of the case, museums and cultural institutions worldwide began reviewing their security protocols, particularly regarding textile collections that had traditionally received less attention than more prominent artifacts. Several indigenous communities worked with authorities to catalog and reclaim items from Colby's collection that held special cultural or ceremonial significance. The American Pickers Show underwent a complete internal review, with new protocols established to ensure transparent documentation of all acquisitions and their subsequent disposition. While the program eventually resumed production, it did so under increased scrutiny and with explicit commitments to ethical collecting practices. For many viewers and fans, the case represented a profound disillusionment. The person who had seemed to embody respect for history and preservation on television had, in reality, been participating in the very practices that threaten cultural heritage. The disconnection between public persona and private actions raised uncomfortable questions about the authenticity of reality television and the potential for such platforms to provide cover for questionable activities. Cultural heritage experts viewed the case as a watershed moment in highlighting the vulnerability of textile artifacts and indigenous cultural items, which had often received less attention and protection than more traditional categories of antiquities. The extensive documentation found in Colby's possession, while created for problematic purposes, provided valuable information about trafficking networks and methods that would inform future protection efforts. Law enforcement officials noted that the case demonstrated the increasingly sophisticated nature of cultural property crimes, with traditional trafficking networks adopting modern techniques including shell companies, cryptocurrency, and elaborate laundering operations. The methods uncovered in the investigation led to significant changes in monitoring and enforcement practices across multiple agencies. For Danielle Colby herself, the case represented both an ending and a beginning. While her television career and reputation suffered irreparable damage, her cooperation with authorities and eventual acknowledgement of wrongdoing opened possibilities for a different kind of contribution to cultural preservation, one based on transparency, ethical practice, and proper respect for the provenance and cultural significance of historical items. The FBI's discovery behind Danielle Colby's carefully constructed public image fundamentally changed multiple worlds: the reality television industry, the market for historical textiles, and approaches to protecting vulnerable categories of cultural heritage. What had begun as a random customs inspection had revealed a network that connected television fame, historical preservation, and illicit trafficking in ways that would continue to reverberate through museums, private collections, and indigenous communities for years to come. The warehouse in Chicago and the underground vault in Puerto Rico, once scenes of clandestine activity, were eventually repurposed as educational facilities where law enforcement and museum security personnel could learn about the techniques used by traffickers and the special requirements for protecting textile artifacts. The facilities that had once hidden stolen cultural treasures became tools for preventing similar thefts in the future. Perhaps the most lasting impact came in the form of increased awareness. The case highlighted how passion for collecting and preservation can cross ethical and legal boundaries, particularly when combined with expertise, resources, and connections. For many collectors of vintage items, the story prompted uncomfortable but necessary reflection on the provenance of their own acquisitions and the responsibilities that come with possessing items of cultural significance. In the end, what the FBI discovered behind Danielle Colby's property was not just a sophisticated trafficking operation, but a cautionary tale about the fine line between appreciation and appropriation, between preservation and possession. The agents who turned pale upon seeing the hidden collection had encountered not just evidence of crimes, but a profound reminder of how easily passion can become exploitation when divorced from ethical consideration and respect for the cultures from which historical artifacts originate.